Hi, everyone. I'm Ty Edwards with Women for Kansas. Welcome on this beautiful day. I think most of Kansas is experiencing unseasonably cool, wonderful temperatures. So thank you for joining us online today. So I'm Ty Edwards again. I'm with the Executive Committee of Women for Kansas. Today we are here as part of our Women's Equality Day celebration. You may know Women's Equality Day is on August 26th, which celebrates the certification of the 19th Amendment, which of course happened in 1920. Of course, we want to remember not all women in the United States actually got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. Jim Crow, of course, many indigenous peoples were not considered citizens. Other barriers for people with disabilities, poverty, etc., prevented people from getting the right to vote, but it was a huge step, right, for a lot of people in getting access to voting rights. So again, Women for Kansas, I should share a little bit about us. So our mission is to recruit, motivate, and educate women and all Kansans to actively participate in the process of electing moderates to public office who will advocate for moderate policies. You can learn more about us at womenforkansas.org. There you can subscribe to our newsletter or learn about other events that are happening. Of course, we would always welcome your financial support. You can click on memberships and support. For example, this Zoom, right? We're doing a Zoom webinar. We have to pay for a subscription to do that. And on that note, I wanted to let you know that the video of this event will be posted on Women for Kansas's YouTube channel probably early in the week. And you can see lots of other videos of other events we've done as Women for Kansas on that Women for Kansas YouTube channel. Okay, so let me introduce what we're going to be doing here today and why you've all probably joined us. So today we have Jeanne Klein, a retired theater professor from KU, who began studying Kansas suffragists in 2019. As a member of the Kansas Suffragist Memorial Committee, she provided brief biographies of 13 so-called rebel women who are depicted in Phyllis Garibay-Coon's mural, which you may know is now installed in the state capitol building. So if you visit the Kansas Capitol building in Topeka, you can see that, along with, of course, a lot of other great art. So this presentation is on the Kansas Woman Suffragist Movement, and the intent here is to inspire all Kansas citizens with a greater appreciation of voting rights. And another great thing I should tell you is if you look on your screen, you should be able to see the Q&A button. It has a question mark. Feel free to put questions in there throughout the talk or at the end of the talk, and I'm going to help moderate those at the end so Jeanne can give us so much more information and answer any of your questions. So on that note, I will turn it over. Jeanne Klein, we can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Ty, for that warm introduction, and welcome everyone to women's rights, okay? Women's voting rights. So as you can see, if you're interested in, I'm going to cover mainly the 13 rebel women in Phyllis's mural, but I just wanted to point out another website there that I put on the screen. There are over 500 Kansas suffragists, both women and men, as well as white and black, who are listed at that suffragistmemorial.org site, okay? And most of that information is pretty accurate. So I'll go ahead and get started here, if my slides will move forward. We didn't test that part of it, Ty. Oh my goodness gracious, I don't know why it's not working. The next slide is a photograph of the of Phyllis.
Do you want to, yeah, Jeanne, do you want to turn off the share and just share again and see if that fixes it for you?
Okay. What do I do? I close. Sorry, everybody. I
That's
forget.
all right.
Shut the share down. Wait. I can't. Where's the shut the share? Oh, stop share would
There
be.
you go. Yeah, now try again. Yeah, share
Yeah, it's
again, and
called
I bet
stop
it'll work.
share. Geez, yeah, exactly. Okay. Let me see if it's moving here. Oh, I wonder if I can do it that way.
Yeah, you could do it that way.
Well, what I'm saying is I think I can do it with my mouse
Oh, great.
instead of, I think. Let's see. Ta-da!
There
It's
you go. Yay.
Okay, so here is Phyllis's extraordinary mural that she unveiled on January 29, Kansas Day in 2025 of this year. So again, I'm going to focus on the 13 rebel women and some extra women as well who she selected for this mural. Overall, there were 5 Kansas campaigns for constitutional amendments. The first one, when Kansas became a state, we managed to get rights to vote for school district candidates for school board and so forth. 1867 was a huge a big event with 2 amendments, one for women and one for Black men. And I'll go into detail about that, but that was defeated, okay? But men did earn the right to vote in 1870 with the U.S. 15th Amendment. And then in 1887, Kansas became the first state in the nation to grant women the right to vote in city elections. 1894, they tried again for full suffrage, but that amendment was defeated. And in 1912, Kansas women, as Ty said, most Kansas women, not all, earned the right to vote in all elections, U.S. presidents all the way down. And then in 1920, of course, the U.S. 19th Amendment was ratified. So Clarina Nichols is the #1 major woman who sparked and led the women's suffrage movement. And that's why Phyllis has her at the very front of that V, okay, in her mural. She came from Vermont in 1854. And people had heard her reputation back there. And so they begged her in Lawrence to please give us a lecture on women's rights, which of course she did, which was really fabulous. So that's pretty exciting for Lawrence. In 1857, she moved to Quindaro and became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, which is why Phyllis has depicted her next to an African-American woman who she helped a lot of Black folks through that Underground Railroad. In 1869, she collected over 600 signatures on a petition so that she could argue for women's suffrage at the Wyandotte Convention. And here she is on horseback, riding all across Northeast Kansas collecting these signatures. Try and imagine the feat of that. And then when Kansas became a state, it was due to her efforts that women won the right to vote for school board elections. They earned some child custody rights and some limited property rights. And the other thing that she's important for as well is that Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and other women wrote what's called the History of Women Suffrage, which I have abbreviated down below as HWS. And Clarina Nichols wrote the Kansas chapter for Volume 1 because she had the most experience with everything, okay? And I think another little fun story I'll tell you. Notice in the photograph of Clarina, she's wearing a brooch at her neck. And Phyllis noticed that and wanted to know more about that brooch. And so we communicated and so forth with Clarina Nichols' biographer, Diane Eichern, and found out that the brooch, I think, might have a little bit of hair in it. And I believe it's an amethyst. And so Phyllis worked really hard to make that brooch as realistic and authentic as possible in her mural. So that's how hard Phyllis worked to get, realism authenticated, in this mural, which I thought was really cool. So the 1867 campaign was to remove the words white and male from the state constitution. And because of that, because we were the first in the nation to suggest removing the word male, national suffragists from across the country came to Kansas to campaign. So we had Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony here, Lucy Stone and her husband, Henry Blackwell, and Reverend Olympia Brown, who gave over 600 speeches in Kansas alone. Really extraordinary. And they spoke in Lawrence and lots of other cities and towns all across the state. Unfortunately, that campaign was defeated. So, but as I said, Black men won the right to vote in 1870. I want to mention Helen Eakin Sterrett here because she's pretty important. Susan B. Anthony stayed at her home in Lawrence every time she came to visit because Susan B.'s brother, Daniel Anthony, lived in Leavenworth. So whenever Susan came to Kansas for various reasons for different campaigns, she would stay at Helen's house and then also, of course, stay at her brother's house in Leavenworth. Helen attended the first National Woman Suffrage Convention in 1869. And while she lived in Lawrence, she lectured and published gobs of woman suffrage articles. They're really fascinating to read, really great. And then in 1880, she and her husband moved to Chicago, but she continued advocating for women's and girls' rights all the way through. The other thing I want to mention is she and Reverend Olympia Brown were the only two suffragists who attended the 1919 convention in Chicago when it was imminent that the 19th Amendment was going to be passed. They were the only suffragists who attended that Chicago convention who had attended the first national conventions earlier. So it was really a wonderful gathering, and they could tell their stories about Susan B. Anthony, because by that time Susan B. had passed away. So Helen also wrote part of the 1867 information in the Kansas chapter in volume 2 of the History of Women's Suffrage. Anna C. Waite. I hope people know where Lincoln, Kansas is, because this is a sweet little town. And if you ever get a chance to visit Lincoln, by all means, go. I traveled there in September to deliver this presentation and was just thrilled with the reception and the incredible information they have about Anna C. Waite. They set up a separate exhibit with all of her information. So she organized suffragists in Lincoln in 1879, and she and her husband owned the Lincoln Beacon newspaper, and they used that newspaper to spread suffrage news across the entire state of Kansas for 20 years. So, you know, we rely on social media, right? Newspapers were the social media of their day. So keep all that in mind. Newspapers were incredibly important in the 19th century. The really incredible thing about Anna is that she co-founded the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association, I'll call it KESA, with Bertha H. Ellsworth, all right? And it's Kansas Equal Suffrage Association is the forerunner of today's League of Women Voters. That's why this is so incredibly important, okay? So they started it in June of 1884 with a meeting in Topeka. Anna C. Waite was the first president in 1885 and 86, and she also wrote in the Kansas chapter about the movement in Kansas in volume 3 of the History of Women's Suffrage. She's really incredible. And Phyllis has pictured her seated in a chair next to a child because she was also a teacher, okay? So if you get to Lincoln, by all means, hit the Lincoln County Museum. It's wonderful. So the big point I want to make about the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association is that the annual meetings were held all across Kansas. They weren't just in the populated area of northeastern Kansas, okay? So of course you had Topeka, there's Lincoln, Salina, Newton, Emporia, of course Wichita, Atchison, Enterprise, little town of Enterprise, a small town of Winfield, little Eureka, I hate to say little, but you know, smaller populations. Eureka, Yates Center. Paola, KCK. Olathe was its own town before, you know, as it's a suburb now. McPherson, Abilene, and the last convention in 1913 was held in Lawrence as the Jubilee celebration from winning the vote. So here again is a list of the presidents, okay, starting with Anna C. Waite, and I'm going to cover most of these, but again, you can see all the different towns, the small towns, Eureka, Paola, Garnett is another one, Liberty and Parsons, Cottonwood Falls, Enterprise, there's Enterprise. So lots of different towns across the state. And again, when they campaigned, it was everywhere, all right? So the 1887 campaign, this is what, I can't remember if this is the Senate or the House chamber looked like in that year. So Anna O. Anthony was the sister-in-law of Susan B. She and her husband hosted national suffragists at their Leavenworth home during the 1887 campaign. And the thing that's kind of interesting about this is Phyllis had, if you look in the upper, what is it, left-hand corner of her mural, she has a house, and that's how she shows Anna and Daniel and Susan B. Anthony, okay? And as it turned out, my friend Mary Ann Brown, who is the curator at the Leavenworth County Historical Society, she had an illustration of what the house looked like in 1887. So I sent that illustration to Phyllis, and she has adjusted her drawing of the house. Again, her desire to be as realistic as possible. The other thing that Mary Ann Brown did is that she got the first Kansas National Votes for Women Trail marker located in Leavenworth. And this is done by the William Pomeroy Foundation. So before COVID, around 2020 or 2019, I think, there was an organization created called the National Votes for Women Trail. And the idea is that it's a massive database, and anyone from anywhere in the United States can post various sites of where women suffragists either spoke, like a hotel or a built any kind of a building whatsoever, where they might have been buried, where they died, etc., anything. So I already submitted things for Lawrence and encouraged other county historical societies across Kansas to please, enter their data into the database. And the database is still around, but in my view, it's hard to navigate. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but just type in National Votes for Women Trail and you can find things. But anyway, there's a private foundation that donated money towards having some of these markers done. And Mary Ann got a marker for Annie, Anthony, and Daniel just down up the street from their house. That's right along the river there. And the dedication was really wonderful in October 2023. So I urge other folks across Kansas to see if those markers, those Pomeroy markers, are still around, and to try and get one for their suffrages. So another woman she's not part of the Rebel Women, but in the mural, but I wanted to point out Martia L. Berry from Cawker City. She was a big supporter and longtime treasurer of KISA, attended the convention in Lincoln, of course, and was also president of the 6th District of Kansas Women's Christian Temperance Union. So if you don't already know, suffragists and temperance members were interconnected, okay? So they helped each other out a great deal. And part of the reason so many women were involved in the temperance movement was because there were a lot of men out there who would get drunk, and they'd be so drunk that they would not and could not support their families. So women in particular were more than happy to join the suffragist movement as well as temperance to have their rights heard, to have their voices heard as well. The other cool thing about Martia is when I contacted the curator at the Cawker City Museum, he said that they have a copy of the history of women's suffrage signed by Susan B. Anthony. So Martia must have gotten it from Susan B. So I think that's a fun thing as well. So if you go to Cawker City, ask to look at the book. So on February 15, 1887, which happened to be Susan B. Anthony's birthday, Kansas became the first state in the nation to grant municipal suffrage to women. And one of the women involved in that campaign was Sarah A. Brown, again from Lawrence. I need to mention some Lawrence people just for the other things that they did. Sarah Brown was active in basically 3 campaigns, and was also the first woman nominated for a state office, that of the state superintendent of public instruction. And even though she didn't win that election, she had the support of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony too, but apparently it didn't make enough of a difference. But one of the big things she did is she co-authored a pamphlet called What Women Voters Can Do, and distributed 50,000 copies across the entire state. So it was basically a way of teaching women how to register to vote, how to fill out a ballot. They had separate woman ballots, okay, that their ballots would go into, etc. So she's an important woman. And Carolyn Langston Hughes and Mary Jane Dillard are also some Laurentians who are important. Carrie Langston, the daughter of Mary and Charles Langston, was a civil rights advocate like her parents, and she urged women to enter politics as journalists, much like Ida B. Wells, okay? And also encouraged the literary education of her son, who is the famous poet you may know, Langston Hughes, in Topeka, when they lived in Topeka. And then Mamie Dillard was also a very prominent educator. She promoted temperance as well. and also civil rights in education in Lawrence. And she taught Langston Hughes around 1909 at Pinckney School in Lawrence. So that's why Phyllis has included both of them with Langston as a young boy at a desk, being mentored by his mother and teacher. Laura M. Johns, very important lady from Salina, was busy as a lecturer and a journalist. She was KISA president for 6 terms. So that's why Phyllis has depicted her wearing a KISA sash across her costume, her dress. She was also president of the Kansas Republican Women's Association in the 1890s. She lobbied Republican legislators very fiercely, also coordinated 30 suffrage campaigns across the entire state, and chaired the Kansas Woman Suffrage Amendment campaign for the National Woman Suffrage Association in 1894. So I know I spoke with the folks in Salina, the league there, and I'm hoping that that there may still be Pomeroy markers available so that they could have a marker for her, because she really deserves one in Salina. So the 1894 campaign was for full suffrage, president on down. Colorado had just won full suffrage in 1893. So Kansas thought, well, why not? Come on, let's go. We're neighbors. We ought to be able to win it. So again, in Lawrence, W.H.T. Wakefield published a little 4-page newsletter called The Suffrage Advocate. And he circulated 5,000 copies across the state for a couple of months in 1894. But unfortunately, in November, over half of Kansas male voters defeated this amendment by over 34,000 votes. And part of what always irks me is when people don't vote at all. All right. And 25% did not vote on that amendment, which is, I think, pretty sad. So Annie Diggs, another incredible woman, and I'm going to sneeze here possibly, so excuse me. We'll see. She came to Lawrence. She's from Canada, and she came to Lawrence in 1879 and lectured on women's suffrage and temperance for quite a bit. Attended 2 national conventions in 81 and 85. And while Laura Johns was lobbying the Republican legislators, Annie Diggs was lobbying the populist legislators who had just taken over the legislature in the 1890s, if you know that whole political story in Kansas. And this, you have to keep in mind, this woman was only 5 feet tall. She was very petite, but she used to say, I am the fierce one. I scare people. And she was very assertive, very active. She was appointed the state librarian in 1898 and helped design the library in the state capitol. So while you're in the capitol, looking at the mural, by all means, go to the state capitol. Enjoy the gorgeous design, the glass floors and the wrought iron fence stairways and whatnot. And also, don't forget, in the front of the library is a desk that is Annie Diggs' desks. So, as I like to say, touch the desk and feel the energy. So she was KISA president in 1899 and also wrote the Kansas chapter of Volume 4 in the history of women's suffrage. So very important lady. Oh, by the way, she moved to Topeka in 1890 in order to lobby the state legislators. Okay. And then she left Kansas and went elsewhere, and she ended up in Detroit, Michigan, my hometown. And that's where she's buried because her son was there. Laura Gregg is another important woman who came from the small town of Garnett, and she was hired as a field organizer and lecturer for the National Association for the Oklahoma and Arizona territories. She also organized several Kansas counties and was KISA president in 1900. So again, to point out another woman from a small town who's doing big things across the state. Lila D. Monroe, another great lady, came from Wakini and then moved to Topeka. She was the first woman to practice law before the Kansas Supreme Court in 1895. Also served as KISA president in 1907. And another great thing is she published what was called the Kansas Woman's Journal. And again, it was like a newspaper that would spread news, suffrage news, and news about women who were elected to offices and any other kinds of articles, okay, for, by, and about women. And the other really cool thing is she gathered stories from over 800 pioneer women. And the book was published by her after her death by her great granddaughter, Joanna Stratton, in 1981. So if you haven't read the book, I would urge you to read this book. It's really fascinating. It's wonderful. And the other cool thing is I managed to contact Joanna Stratton, who's now Mrs. Roz, living in, Mercer Island, Washington State, and caught her in time so that she could thank everyone and donate money towards the murals. So she's another one who, another important person who made the mural possible, which is very neat. Ludi Little is born in Tennessee, but she moves to Topeka with her family in 1882. So she's educated in Topeka, and she becomes the first African-American woman admitted to the Bar Association in 1897. So Phyllis has depicted her seated at a desk there, advising other women, because one of the things that she did is she lectured on marriage and divorce laws, which could, be kind of confusing to some women throughout Kansas. And then she ended up moving to Brooklyn, New York, and that's where she's buried. So you can learn more about her online. Great lady. So the Kansas Suffrage Réveillé, I believe is how that's pronounced, was the official KISA newspaper, and they had 55 issues published monthly from 1896 to 1900. And again, another means of spreading suffrage news about what's going on with state and local organizations, women who were being elected to various local offices across the state, and what the national suffragists were up to in their areas. And again, edited and published by Kate Addison in Little Eureka, Kansas for a couple of years, and then by Alice M. David in Leroy, Kansas for 2 years until 1900. So again, you can, and especially today, we can do whatever we want at our computers at home and spread it across the country, right? So that's what they were doing with newspapers back then. So for about 9 years, KISA kept asking for full suffrage 5 more times, but of course, all the bills died, mostly in the Senate, which I think is still kind of true today. The Senate is what puts a kibosh on lots of things. So another woman I wanted to mention too is Sadie Grisham, and she was from Cottonwood Falls. She was the city council president of Cottonwood Falls in 1889. So it wasn't unusual for women to be, on city councils early on before they had the right to vote. She served as KISA president in 1904, campaigned across Chase County during the major campaign in 1912, and also became a founding member of the Kansas Woman Lawyers Association in 1919. So let's not forget the small towns where big things can happen. If there's one name to memorize out of all the names I've thrown at you today, you must memorize Lizzie S. Sheldon, okay? Incredibly important woman. She was a KU law graduate, a very staunch Democrat back when the Democrats and Republicans held opposite ideologies, admitted to the Kansas Bar Association, and she lobbied the state legislators beginning in 1907 without bothering to consult anyone in KISA. She was this woman who just went and did it, okay? She didn't ask for permission for anything. She just did actions. And she's also the first woman to run for the state Supreme Court justice in 1914. And if memory serves, I believe she lost that, it was either the primary or the election by 13 votes. So that's how close she came. So here's why she's so important. She's the woman who wrote the resolution for the constitutional amendment in 1911. And the language is, the rights of citizens of the state of Kansas to vote and hold offices shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. And that, I hope you recognize that language is very similar to our Equal Rights Amendment today that we're still trying to get passed since 1972. That's a whole other long story. But Phyllis has put Lizzie's language of the resolution on a banner all the way across the top of the mural, okay? And I believe she signed Lizzie's name to it as well, and the year and so forth. So the other story I want to tell you that's really fascinating is that as you can imagine, women were not allowed inside the House or the Senate chamber, right? Because they're women, so they had to stay out in the lobby. So she wrote her resolution and handed the paper to Senator George Hodges in 1911. And he presented it to both, to the Senate as a concurrent resolution. It got passed in both houses, and Governor Walter Stubbs signed it in 1912. Okay. Well, 2 years later, George Hodges becomes governor of Kansas. And he says, I'm the one who got women the right to vote. And Lizzie shot right back in the newspapers and she said, he did not. He is lying. I wrote that resolution. So again, and I was just rereading that news article today, that she, and this is when she was running for a Supreme Court justice. So she was not afraid to call out anyone for being a liar. All right. And George Hodges was one of them. She wanted to make sure people knew that she was the person who wrote this language. Okay. Lucy B. Johnston, another important woman who came from Minneapolis, Kansas, and moved to Topeka. She earned her Doctor of Law degrees way back in 1866 at Oxford University. All right, so there are handfuls of women who earned their professional degrees ages ago. She also expanded the Kansas Traveling Libraries collection, excuse me, in 1899. Which is why Phyllis has her depicted next to a wagon with filled with library books. Okay. She was also KISA president for a couple years during the main campaign here, so pretty important lady, and then wrote the Kansas chapter in volume 6 of the History of Women's Suffrage. So, so the 1912 campaign, pretty important. This is what the Capitol looked like at the time. And she, Lucy B. Johnston, explained in her chapter how and why women won full suffrage in 1912 and instead of the defeats they'd had earlier. So here are the reasons why they won in this year, and I think there's some lessons that we can take from this when we're trying to fight voter suppression laws and so forth. So as you know, Kansas had been a prohibition state since 1881 for 32 years. And as Lucy said, men were deprived of their liquor centers where they could congregate, right? And the other thing that happened is that the Associated Press exposed their anti-suffragist lies just before the election. So that helped as well. There was also a men's equal suffrage league that included her husband, who happened to be the chief Supreme Court justice of Kansas, and they would conduct speakers tours across the state at no cost. So that saved a lot of money. The other important thing, too, for us to remember is that the suffragists traveled to where the crowds gathered, right? At Chautauquas, factories, county fairs, you name it. So the idea is you don't just wait for people to come to you, you go to them, okay? You go to where crowds assemble. So suffragists went to all various kinds of conventions for teachers, for ministers, for farmers, all the temperance unions, any kind of women's organization, all the various women's clubs, you name it. They went to these conventions and spoke to groups of women at a time about why it was important to for men and for men to pass the amendment and why women should support it. And of course, this is the time of the progressive movement. So there's a lot of party politicians who finally got converted and joined the bandwagon and asked for forgiveness for not supporting the amendment earlier. So here's an example of an automobile parade in Topeka. That's Walter Stubbs in the front. And Stella Stubbs is on the back right. And Lucy B. Johnston and Sarah Thurston are also pictured there in the middle. Sarah Thurston was the president of the Shawnee County chapter of KISA. And then another woman, Laura Clay from Kentucky, is back there as well. And this is the classic auto parade photo that was actually taken in Douglas County for the Douglas County Fair in Lawrence, okay? And this photo is the one that Phyllis has added to her mural. You'll see the automobile coming down a hill, okay? And people are here. And I have more specific information on this, but I won't. I'll just let you know. This is a this is a car that it's called a Rambler, I found out, driven on the right side. Okay. And so that's the driver. I forget his name, Perkins. And then the woman in front there is the president of the KU College League of Women League for suffragists. And then the little girl just behind the KU woman is Marcella Chalkley, and she was the daughter of Genevieve Chalkley, who was the president at the time in 1913 after women won the right to vote. So she's already getting her daughter, acclimated to suffrage rights. And then I can't remember all the women in the back, but one of them is Mary L. Strong, who was the wife of Chancellor Frank Strong at KU, who, by the way, she's the one who converted him to suffrage rights. So another important person, of course, is Minnie Grinstead. She came from both Larned and Liberal, earned her lifetime teaching certificate from Emporia State, moved to Liberal, and campaigned for women's suffrage in that 7th congressional district. And what's really wonderful is she was the first woman elected to the Kansas House of Representatives in 1918. So she's pictured at her desk for the mural. And what's very neat is that she presented the joint resolution in the Senate and the House for Kansas to ratify the 19th Amendment on June 16, 1919. So that's rather appropriate that a woman would be able to present that joint resolution. And finally, Jane Brooks from Wichita. She was KISA president from 1917 to 18, and she is the woman who founded the first state chapter, that of Kansas, of the National League of Women Voters in 1919. Okay, so she founded both the Kansas chapter and the Sedgwick County chapter. And she was known as a formidable lady who you knew would make a success of whatever she did. And they have, if you're from Wichita, if you already know, there are, I think, 1 or 2 sorts of, I don't know, monuments or some kinds of markers that note her name in Wichita, so that she is known, should be known more widely in the city of Wichita. So finally, a question that I had, and I think I've got partial answers for it. Why did the Kansas Supreme Court rule that the 2020 gerrymandered map was just fine because they said that voting rights are not in the Constitution? My question was, what happened to the 1912 constitutional amendment that granted women the right to vote? Well, thanks to a local representative who stepped down from the state legislature, Boog Heiberger, he found out, he went to his constitutional book and he found out that the 1912 constitutional amendment was folded into a 1974 amendment that granted everybody over the age of 18 the right to vote. But I'm still confused about why that the reasoning, I still don't understand the reasoning, okay, of why the Supreme Court says that the 2020 gerrymandered map is fine, okay? And if you look at that map, I mean, part of what really irks me in particular being in Lawrence is you see how there's a little dip. There's a line drawn across, horizontally across the state of Kansas, and there's a little dip towards in the northeast side, and that's Lawrence. So we are now in the 1st district. No offense against the 1st district, the Big West, but Lawrence has very little, does not have sufficient, I'll say, interest in Kansas agriculture as much. Okay. And what happens is you have, as you already know all this, that our representatives tend to focus on agriculture because that's where, the size of their districts are located in the western portion of Kansas. And they tend to avoid Wyandotte, Kansas, KCK, and now part of Jeff County that was gerrymandered, trying to stop Sharice Davids from winning an election. So we'll see what happens. Finally, I just wanted to mention, if you're wondering where the colors of the Women's Party flag came from, yellow was the color that Susan B. Anthony chose in 1867 based on Kansas sunflowers. And so that's why the Kansas suffragists would wear yellow ribbons, okay? White is means purity, that women were considered more pure than men, you know, married or single. And purple is the symbol for loyalty. So now you know about those colors. And the last thing I'll mention real quick is, so I discovered that Lizzie Sheldon does not have a grave marker at Oak Hill Cemetery in Lawrence, Kansas. We have rectified that. I ordered a grave marker for her that states that she wrote the resolution for the constitutional amendment that gave women the right to vote. What we plan on doing is, after the marker is installed sometime this fall, we plan to invite everybody and anybody, you're all invited to come to a dedication of her stone at Oak Hill. And the other thing we hope to do is to amend the soil and plant yellow, white, and purple crocus around her gravestone, which are the suffragist colors. So we hope that if you happen to get to Lawrence and can come visit and stuff, hopefully you'll be able to see her, come to the dedication, or else at least honor her, her gravesite. So thank you very, very much for attending, everybody. I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions you have.
Okay, awesome. Jeanne, do you want to turn off your slides? Maybe stop share so people can see you a little more while
Okay.
we do questions.
All righty.
Awesome. Okay, so I have a few, so feel free to put more questions in the Q&A if anyone wants to. And then we have a few questions to start off with, and then we'll watch for some more that come rolling in.
Okay.
So first question, what surprised you about your research into the people that ended up being depicted in the mural that's now in the Capitol?
Well, I think that's the point I made, that it was a statewide movement. Okay, it wasn't just where the population was. And basically, again, I came to the Kansas Suffragist Memorial Committee a little late, and based on being a historian, I provided most of the history. And so I think the women before me on the committee had gotten some names of women from the Kansas Historical Society who were not suffragists. Okay, Carrie Nation, I'm sorry, she was not a suffragist. Susanna Salter, yeah, she was the first woman in the nation to become a mayor just because a bunch of men made a joke and she happened to get elected, okay? But she went to the 1887 convention and then went home, all right, and raised her kids and never ran for office ever again. And I don't even know if she even campaigned at all whatsoever in Argonia. I have no clue. So we put together a website, and we helped, and so I helped provide the biographies and so forth for the women. And then Phyllis chose 13 of women from the list. And and then I wrote the brief biographies, okay, just the one sentence. So for the plaque that sits below the mural. So if you go to the mural, you'll see I think it's a bronze plaque below, and it has the numbers, right? Like here's number 1, number 2, number 3 of the 13 women, and identifying who is who and which town they're from, because we wanted to again be clear to people that this was a statewide movement, not just Northeast Kansas, where the population was.
Awesome. Okay, another question is, you referenced frequently some of the women you talk about helping write the Kansas chapter in the History of Woman Suffrage volumes. So tell us a little bit more about those books and what's valuable in them, when you're doing this kind of research.
Yeah, well, that's where I pretty much started. Okay, they are all online. You can read the Kansas chapters all online, so I want to say it's the Gutenberg website. I can't remember for sure. Anyway, so I read those chapters, and that's where I was collecting names, right? That's where I found out here are the women who did XYZ, etc., describing this whole movement. And I just thought it was really remarkable, again, considering, the lack of transportation. I mean, these people are, again, on horseback, they're in hacks, in carriages, with one or two horses. And it's not until later that they can travel by railroad. All right. And it can go whole lot faster with the railroad. And so yeah, it's I just marveled at these women. The other point I want to make too, that I was remembering today, when Lucy B. Johnston wrote the chapter on, Kansas for the winning the vote in 1912, she did not mention Lizzie S. Sheldon. Martha Caldwell has also written a fabulous article about the campaign, the 1912 campaign. She does not mention Lizzie S. Sheldon. So I'm confused. So what I did, well, actually what I did in January 19, I actually began focusing on Lawrence suffragists, okay? And my research focuses on newspaper articles. So I search all the newspaper articles. That's how I find names. And lo and behold, I find the name of Lizzie S. Sheldon in Lawrence. And I'm thinking, well, heck, she wrote she wrote the resolution. Why aren't these other women, these other leaders talking about her in the history of women's suffrage? So what I did, so when Phyllis included her in the mural, what I did is I wrote a brief biography on Lizzie, and I sent it to the Kansas Historical Society because they didn't have her anywhere on their website either. All right. So I just checked it today. It's on their website and it says Lizzie is featured in the mural. So, and
Yeah.
she did a whole lot more stuff in Lawrence. I mean, she was one of those women who went to all the city council meetings, right? And complained about X, Y, and Z and made it happen. I mean, she just a force of nature, incredible force of nature. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so you mentioned several women that were also lawyers, and you talked
Yes.
about that. So, do you know how unusual it was for women to become lawyers before they had even won suffrage?
That is a great question, and I'm not the person to answer it. Because I haven't really done a deep dive into that. Um, I've done general research, in the first half of the 19th century. As we know, most women knew that the only thing they were allowed to do was teaching, right? Or being a nurse in the Civil War, okay, to nurse soldiers and whatnot. But yeah, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, I mean, that was unusual. And now I'm forgetting Catherine Sedgwick. There it is. Catherine Sedgwick was one of the first women to create an all-women's college, as I recall. And so there were, again, more colleges like that, okay, across especially on the east side of the country. And so, yeah, it's again remarkable that they were able to do these kinds of things. Okay, and same thing with well, I'm thinking of Lucy Hobbs Taylor here in Lawrence. She was the first woman dentist in the country. Okay, and happened to have a practice here in Lawrence, Kansas. So yeah, it's incredible when you find these women. And there's another Dr. Blackwell. Elizabeth Blackwell became a doctor early on too, and I can't remember where she got her degree. So yeah, there are many extraordinary women who chose professional lives, but also got married and had kids. So it's what women do.
So, another question is you mentioned several of the places where people were buried, right? Like Annie Diggs is buried in Detroit. You talked about Lizzie Sheldon and getting a new stone. Were you able to find where all of the women you talked about or who are in the mural are buried?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a year ago in May, before the dedication, Seal King, who was is the co-chair of the Suffragist Memorial Committee, said, "Wouldn't it be neat if we could find the descendants of all 13 women?" So yours truly spent a good solid month searching the genealogies of the 13 women, okay? And I got pretty excited when some women had no children, okay? So I thought, okay, good, there's no descendants. I don't have to worry about them, all right? But oh man, Annie Diggs was a trick. Oh, heavens to bets. Because her husband and a daughter lived in England for a few years. And lo and behold, I actually found I think it was a passport or maybe it was a news article about Elvin Diggs in London or somewhere around the area. So yeah, it was a trick, okay? And as far as I understand, Laura Johns did not have children because her obit in 1936 or around that time said something like, well, she's survived by a nephew or something. And I did send my whole long genealogy information to folks in Salina. So hopefully they could maybe find a few scattered names here and there and track people down in Salina and see if there were any living descendants. And I never heard back from them. So yeah, that was quite the project. So that's why I got excited when I could, when I could contact Joanna Stratton Roz, okay, for Lila D. Monroe, which was very cool. There were, Seal did get in touch with several descendants of Jane Brooks because she was the older of the suffragists, right? And there, I think one or two of her descendants came to the dedication and they were there in person. So that was very, very neat. But I don't remember meeting any other descendants at the dedication. So we did have some folks, send donations in by mail and whatnot, and they're in the program.
Okay, so someone also asked, you've referenced how there's 13 women on the mural. Could you remind us what those 13 are? What's their names again?
Oh geez, okay. I don't have here. Let me go get my postcard so I can remember the order of who's where what. Okay, so in the upper, what is that called? Left corner, I guess. That's where Anthony is. Okay, so Anna Anthony, at her house in Leavenworth, she's up there. Then we have Ludi Little, I think it's pronounced Lytle, I'm not sure, seated at the desk. Then we have Anna C. Waite sitting in a chair. And then, oh, who's that? I think that's Lila D. Monroe, as I recall. Then Annie Diggs, Laura Johns, Clarina Nichols again is in the very front. Okay. Then you have, and then this African-American woman again is to symbolize the Underground Railroad, to put some representation in there. Lizzie Sheldon is next. Now keep in mind that this particular image is the draft or the final revision, okay, that Phyllis submitted to the Capital Preservation Committee. All right. But she made some other changes, which reminds me of one I want to tell you about. Okay, so there's a few little changes that she has made, but I'm just still going, she's kept that order pretty much. Then there's Carrie Langston and Mamie Dillard looking over Langston Hughes' schoolwork. And then Jane Brooks is next to the ballot box there. And Lucy B. Johnston is in front of her library, her traveling library. And Minnie Grinstead is seated at a desk. Okay, she's the U.S. or the Kansas representative. All right. Now, see that blank space below Minnie Grinstead where the podium is, her desk is? Okay. So between us, Phyllis added an image of her mother in I think a red dress, and she's holding a copy of the Woman's Journal, which is, so she's, because Phyllis and the committee told Phyllis and us that they only wanted everything to go up to 1920. Because initially, Phyllis had some images in the 21st century, right? Okay. But the committee wanted us to stick just up to 1920. That's it. That's as far as we could go. So Phyllis added her mother holding the Woman's Journal, which was Lila D. Monroe's journal that she did in the 1920s. All right. And then the night before the dedication, she snuck underneath the veil, covering the mural, and painted her mother's wedding ring on her finger. So that's, so we're not mentioning that, in the press or anything or in the mural, but just so you know, when you go to visit, you'll know who that woman is in the corner. The other thing is that you should know is when her final mural was brought, she painted the whole thing at her studio in Manhattan, Kansas. And so brought it down in big truck and so forth. And when it was, when they installed it on the wall, before they installed it on the wall, Governor Laura Kelly wrote her name on the back of the mural with the date. Okay. So these are just little tweaks, little things that are really nice to know. And because it was Laura Kelly who signed the bipartisan bill that gave us permission to even raise money for this mural. Okay, so it's very important.
Wow, that's exciting. I will say one person put a comment. You had mentioned the Equal Rights Amendment. Someone put in the Q&A that if anyone's interested in the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, even today, you can look up the ERA Coalition online.
Yep.
And then we had one other question, which was, is there a way to share your slides, or have you posted your slides anywhere for people to look at, or is that same information available in some other spot online?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if you want my, well, as Ty has mentioned, this is being recorded. I am giving permission to, and I have another presentation I'll be doing for the Wichita League of Women Voters in December, early December. So I have given permission to the places that I've done this to record it and to post the recording online. Okay. If you would like the slides, contact me by email, Klein J, KLEINJ at KU.edu.
And I put that in the chat for everyone. I just put Jen's email, and I also put the suffragist website she was talking about. They also have nice little bios of everyone you talked about, shorter than what you shared with us.
Yeah, that's like I said, we had to shorten them. I shortened
Of
them.
course. Yeah, sure.
Good.
Some of that same info. Well, thank you so much. We're almost out of time. So thank you so much for sharing this information.
Sure.
I think all of us learned about Kansans we did not know anything about before. It's wonderful that this is in the capital now for, students and other visitors and of course voters and people representing us to see. So that's wonderful. And we're just so grateful that you shared this with us. Again, as everyone heard, this is going to be posted on the Women for Kansas YouTube channel. So if you'd like to hear more or hear this again or see those slides again, that's a great option. And then, as Jen said, there's some more presentations ahead.
Yes, I'm open to doing more, especially by Zoom, or if they're close enough, I'll drive.
All right. So
Yeah,
again, if you can look in the chat, you can see Jen's email and you can use that. Or of course, you can watch the video again. And thank you so much. Again, you
well,
can learn
thank you,
more.
everybody, and please vote, 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 okay? Please, and when you vote, remember women. Remember how they struggled to get the right for you.
That's an amazing parting thought. Yes, thank you. Okay, well, everyone, happy Sunday and
Bye.
thanks again. Bye.